London, 1846. The afternoon light streamed through tall windows of the Xavier townhouse library as Miss Florence Lockhart sat with rigid posture, hands folded neatly in her lap, awaiting judgment. Across from her, Lady Henrietta Xavier peered through her lorgnette as if Florence were some peculiar specimen in a natural history museum. "Your references from the Harrington household are adequate, I suppose," Lady Xavier said, her tone suggesting they were anything but. "Though I find it curious that a woman of your background would seek employment as a governess." Florence met the woman's gaze steadily. "My circumstances have changed, my lady. My education suits me well for the position." "Indeed?" Lady Xavier sniffed. "My nephew is particular about his daughter's upbringing. Since the tragic passing of his wife 3 years ago, the Duke has been most protective of young Sophia." Florence had heard whispers of the Duke of Westmoreland's devotion to his daughter, and his notorious avoidance of society since his wife's death. The position offered security she desperately needed. "I understand completely, Lady Xavier. I assure you my primary concern will be Miss Sophia's welfare and education." Lady Xavier rose. "Very well. The Duke will make the final determination when he returns from his estate in Derbyshire next week. Until then, you may stay and become acquainted with the child. Mrs. Graves will show you to your quarters." As Florence followed the housekeeper up the grand staircase, she fought to steady her breathing. This position represented her last hope of respectability. 3 years ago, she had been the cherished daughter of Professor Jonathan Lockhart, celebrated scholar and author. Now, her father's disgrace had left her with nothing but her education and determination to survive. The housekeeper's voice cut through her thoughts. "The child can be difficult, Miss Lockhart. The last governess lasted but a fortnight." Florence squared her shoulders. "I'm not easily discouraged, Mrs. Graves." "We shall see," the woman replied, pushing open a door to reveal a small but comfortable bedchamber. "The Duke's household runs with precision. He tolerates no disorder, no disruptions." Left alone, Florence pressed her forehead against the cool window glass. Below, the garden stretched like a green oasis amid London's chaos. Her future depended on taming one reportedly unmanageable child and impressing a Duke known for his exacting standards and reclusive nature. "Well, father," she whispered, "you always said courage reveals itself when facing impossible odds." 8-year-old Sophia Xavier regarded Florence with open suspicion the following morning. "You won't last either," the child declared, arms crossed over her chest. "I've had 4 governesses since Christmas." "I admire your persistence, Miss Sophia," Florence replied calmly, arranging books on the schoolroom table. "Though I wonder if your energy might be better directed toward your studies rather than dispatching governesses." The girl's eyes widened at this unexpected response. "Papa says I'm too clever for most people." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Florence smiled. "Perhaps we might demonstrate that cleverness through your accomplishments rather than your strategic eliminations." A reluctant smile tugged at the girl's lips. "You speak differently than the others." "I suspect I am different than the others, Miss Sophia." Florence gestured toward the chair. "Shall we begin with literature or mathematics today?" By afternoon, an uneasy truce had formed. Sophia, while still testing boundaries, displayed remarkable intelligence. As they closed their books, Florence heard the commotion below, doors opening, voices raised in greeting. "Papa!" Sophia leapt up, eyes bright with excitement. "He wasn't meant to return until next week." Before Florence could respond, Sophia had darted from the room. Smoothing her plain grey dress, Florence followed at a more measured pace. From the landing, she observed the scene below. A tall figure in a dark coat embraced the child who had flung herself into his arms. Duke William Xavier of Westmoreland had returned early, and Florence's carefully planned first impression was now in shambles. "Another governess, Aunt Henrietta." William Xavier's deep voice carried up the staircase as Florence hesitated on the landing. "You assured me Miss Penrose was suitable." "Miss Penrose departed after Sophia released a garden snake in her bedchamber," Lady Henrietta replied. "Miss Lockhart comes highly recommended from the Harringtons." The Harringtons, you say? The Duke's tone changed subtly. I wasn't aware they employed governesses. She taught their younger daughters before they departed for Switzerland, Lady Henrietta explained. Ah, here she is now. Florence descended with as much dignity as she could muster, aware of the Duke's penetrating gaze as she approached. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, with intelligent grey eyes and features that might have seemed severe if not for the warmth with which he regarded his daughter. Your Grace, Florence curtsied. I apologize for the intrusion. I was accompanying Miss Sophia back to the schoolroom. And yet I find my daughter racing down the stairs unaccompanied, he observed, one dark eyebrow raised. An oversight I shall not repeat, Your Grace. Florence met his gaze steadily. Though I confess, in my limited experience, enthusiasm for a parent's return often outpaces decorum. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, crossed his face before he nodded. Indeed, Miss Lockhart. We shall discuss your qualifications and my expectations this evening after Sophia retires. As Florence led Sophia back upstairs, she felt the weight of his gaze. The Duke was clearly more observant than she had anticipated. She would need to tread carefully. Later that evening, Florence sat across from the Duke in his study, the polished desk between them like a physical manifestation of the vast social gulf separating their positions. The Harringtons speak highly of your methods, Miss Lockhart, he said, reviewing papers before him. Though I find no mention of your previous employment or family connections. Florence clasped her hands to hide their trembling. My father was Professor Jonathan Lockhart of Oxford, Your Grace. The Duke stilled, recognition flickering in his eyes. The mathematician accused of plagiarism. Yes. Florence refused to lower her gaze. My father maintained his innocence until his death last year. Which left you without resources or connections, Your Grace. The admission cost her, but pride would not feed her. My education is my only asset. William Xavier studied her for a long moment. My daughter has dispatched for governesses in as many months, Miss Lockhart. She is intelligent, headstrong, and, I am told, increasingly manipulative. She is also lonely, Florence said softly, then immediately regretted her boldness. The Duke's expression hardened. You presume much after one day in my household. Forgive me, Your Grace. I spoke out of turn. Indeed. He leaned back, fingers steepled before him. Tell me, Miss Lockhart, what makes you believe you can succeed where others have failed? Florence considered her answer carefully. I understand what it means to lose one's place in the world, Your Grace. Behind Miss Sophia's defiance, I recognize grief and uncertainty. She tests boundaries to discover if anything in her life remains secure. Something shifted in the Duke's eyes, a vulnerability quickly masked. You speak from experience, it seems. I do. Florence straightened her shoulders. I will not coddle Miss Sophia, nor will I break her spirit. She deserves honesty, consistency, and the opportunity to channel her remarkable intelligence toward worthy pursuits. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. You may continue on a probationary basis, Miss Lockhart. 1 month to prove your methods. Florence rose, sensing the dismissal. Thank you, Your Grace. One more thing, he said as she reached the door. Should you encounter any difficulties with my daughter, you will come directly to me, not to my aunt or the servants. As you wish, Your Grace. As Florence climbed the stairs to her chamber, she wondered what exactly she had committed herself to, and whether the flicker of recognition in the Duke's eyes had been something more than mere awareness of her father's disgrace. The following weeks established a routine. Florence found in Sophia a bright but wounded child whose mischief masked deeper insecurities. The girl tested her with small rebellions, ink spilled on lesson books, a frog in the tea caddy, but Florence's steady patience gradually wore down these defenses. The Duke remained a more enigmatic presence. He joined them occasionally for afternoon walks or listened to Sophia's piano practice, his gaze often drifting to Florence with an expression she couldn't decipher. their conversations remained formal, focused entirely on Sophia's progress. One rainy afternoon, Florence encountered him in the library as she searched for a volume of poetry. "Miss Lockhart," he acknowledged, looking up from his desk. "I trust Sophia is completing her French exercises." "With impressive determination, Your Grace," Florence replied. "She's quite gifted with languages." "Her mother was fluent in 4, he said, an uncharacteristic softness in his tone. Lady Caroline insisted Sophia would be equally accomplished. Florence recognized the rare opening. "Miss Sophia often speaks of her mother. Perhaps you might share some of those memories more directly? Children find comfort in knowing their departed parents through stories." The Duke's expression closed immediately. "I implore you to educate my daughter, Miss Lockhart, not to advise me on matters of the heart." Florence felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Of course, Your Grace. I overstepped." "Indeed." He returned to his papers. "You may take whatever volumes you require." That evening, however, Florence overheard him in the nursery, his deep voice recounting to Sophia a story about her mother's fondness for stargazing. The child's delighted laughter echoed down the hallway, and Florence smiled despite herself. "The Duke watches you, you know," Lady Xavier's companion, Miss Thornfield, whispered to Florence during an afternoon musicale 3 weeks into her employment. Most peculiarly. Florence maintained her composure with effort. "His Grace is naturally concerned with his daughter's education." "Is that what you believe?" Miss Thornfield's smile held knowing malice. "Perhaps you aren't aware. The Duke was instrumental in exposing your father's academic indiscretions." The room seemed to tilt beneath Florence's feet. "I beg your pardon." "Oh dear, you didn't know." False sympathy dripped from the woman's words. William Xavier was one of the committee members who reviewed the evidence. His testimony before the university board was quite devastating, I'm told. Florence excused herself with trembling hands, retreating to a small anteroom where she struggled to breathe. The Duke had known exactly who she was when he hired her. Worse, he had contributed to her father's downfall, to the disgrace that had ultimately led to his death. "Miss Lockhart." His voice behind her nearly undid her composure. "Are you unwell?" Florence turned, unable to mask her distress. "Is it true, Your Grace? Were you on the committee that condemned my father?" His expression confirmed it before he spoke. "I was." "And yet you employed me, knowing who I was." Her voice shook with the effort to maintain dignity. "Was it curiosity? Or perhaps some perverse experiment?" "It was neither." His voice remained calm, reasonable. "Your references were excellent. Your background in mathematics particularly suited Sophia's needs." "My background?" Florence laughed bitterly. The daughter of a disgraced mathematician, reduced to servitude in the household of the man who helped destroy him. "Your father destroyed himself, Miss Lockhart," the Duke said quietly. The evidence was incontrovertible. He maintained his innocence until his death. Florence straightened her shoulders. A death hastened by disgrace and poverty. Something like regret crossed his features. "I am sorry for your loss, but the committee's findings were unanimous." "Then I wonder, Your Grace, why you chose to bring your daughter's education into the hands of such questionable character." Florence's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Unless you believe the sins of the father are not visited upon the child." Before he could answer, Sophia appeared in the doorway. "Papa? Miss Lockhart?" "Lady Xavier says it's time for the musical performance." The conversation suspended, they returned to the drawing room, a chasm now opened between them. That night, Florence wrote her resignation letter, intending to seek a position elsewhere. Yet as dawn broke, she found herself unable to leave Sophia without explanation. One more day, she decided. One day to say goodbye properly to the child who had begun to claim her heart. She was startled when the Duke requested her presence in his study after breakfast. He stood at the window, his back to the door as she entered. "I believe I owe you an explanation, Miss Lockhart," he said without turning. And perhaps an apology. Florence remained silent, waiting. I recognized your name immediately when my aunt presented your application, he continued, finally facing her. I was curious, I admit. The professor's daughter, seeking employment in my household. It seemed too coincidental. And yet you hired me. I intended to observe you briefly, then find cause to dismiss you. His honesty startled her. But your understanding of Sophia, your approach to her education, it was precisely what she needed. So you allowed me to stay, never mentioning your role in my father's disgrace. A decision I now regret. He gestured to a chair. Please, sit. There is more you should know. Reluctantly, Florence complied. The Duke opened a drawer, removing a leather folio which he placed before her. After our conversation yesterday, I reviewed the committee's findings, he said. I had not examined them since the hearing 3 years ago. At the time, the evidence seemed definitive. Now, however, I notice inconsistencies. Florence's heart quickened. What sort of inconsistencies? The mathematical proofs your father was accused of plagiarizing from Professor Hammond, there are elements that don't align with Hammond's previous work. His grey eyes held hers. Elements that do, however, reflect your father's unique approach. Hope surged painfully in Florence's chest. Are you suggesting the committee was wrong? I'm suggesting the possibility deserves further investigation. He hesitated. With your permission, I would like to reopen the inquiry privately, beginning with Hammond's original notes. Florence stared at him, torn between suspicion and desperate hope. Why would you do this? Perhaps I wish to ensure justice was properly served, he said carefully. Or perhaps? He stopped, something vulnerable crossing his features. Perhaps I've come to respect the daughter and wonder if I misjudged the father. Over the following weeks, an unlikely partnership formed. By day, Florence continued Sophia's education. In the evenings, she and the Duke pored over mathematical journals, correspondence, and committee testimony, searching for evidence of her father's innocence. Their shared purpose gradually dissolved the formality between them. Florence discovered beneath the Duke's austere exterior a man of profound integrity and unexpected humor. William found himself captivated by her sharp mind and quiet strength. You have your father's analytical approach, he observed one evening as they worked. But there's an intuitive element to your reasoning that's entirely your own. Florence looked up, surprised by the personal observation. My mother's influence, perhaps. She was an artist, impractical but insightful. A valuable combination. His smile transformed his face, creating a warmth that Florence found increasingly difficult to resist. Sophia has inherited that same blend of precision and imagination. She's a remarkable child, Florence agreed. So eager to understand the world. She adores you, William said quietly. As do I. The admission hung in the air between them, startling in its simplicity. Florence felt her cheeks warm as she struggled to maintain her composure. Your Grace, William, he corrected gently. At least when we are alone. That would be most improper, she whispered, though her heart raced at the intimacy. More improper than spending our evenings sequestered with mathematical proofs. His smile held a hint of challenge. I believe propriety ceased being our primary concern some time ago, Florence. Her name on his lips sent a tremor through her. We have a common purpose, nothing more. Is that what you believe? He reached across the desk, his fingers lightly touching hers. Then you understand mathematics far better than you understand your own heart. Before she could respond, Mrs. Graves knocked at the study door, announcing a late visitor. The moment shattered, leaving Florence breathless with confusion and unexpected longing. The visitor proved to be Professor Hammond himself, summoned by the Duke's discreet inquiries. His arrival marked a turning point in their investigation, though not as they had anticipated. I've been expecting this conversation for years, Hammond admitted when confronted with the inconsistencies they had discovered. Though I never imagined it would be you leading the charge, Westmoreland. Explain yourself, William demanded, his hand protectively close to Florence's on the desk. Hammond's explanation unfolded like a Greek tragedy. The plagiarism had been real, but in reverse. Hammond had stolen Jonathan Lockhart's early work, building his reputation on theories he hadn't originated. When Lockhart recognized his own concepts in Hammond's celebrated papers, the senior professor had orchestrated a preemptive accusation. With his reputation and my university connections, it was simple to turn the allegations against him, Hammond confessed, the weight of years of deception evident in his slumped shoulders. I never expected the consequences to be so severe. You destroyed my father, Florence said quietly. Not just his career, but his life. I know. Hammond couldn't meet her eyes. When I heard of his death last year, I've been haunted by it. William's voice was cold steel. You will sign a full confession and retraction. Professor Lockhart's reputation will be restored publicly. My career is forfeit, William interrupted. As it should have been 3 years ago. After Hammond departed, Florence found herself unable to speak, overcome by emotions too complex to name. William knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. Your father's name will be cleared, he promised. I will ensure the university makes a public apology and restores his work to its rightful place. Why? Florence whispered. Why have you done all this? His eyes, when they met hers, held no reservation. Because I watched you stand with dignity despite every injustice. Because you showed my daughter compassion when she needed it most. Because somehow, in seeking to make amends for one wrong, I discovered something I never expected to find again. And what was that? She asked, barely breathing. Hope, he said simply. And love. The scandal that erupted when Hammond's confession became public rocked academic circles. The newspapers that had once condemned Professor Lockhart now praised his brilliant contributions to mathematics, while university officials scrambled to distance themselves from the fraud. For Florence, vindication brought bittersweet relief. Her father was gone, unable to witness his redemption. Yet as spring blossomed over London, she found unexpected joy blooming in her own life. William's courts officially announced their intention to re-establish Professor Lockhart's academic legacy through a foundation in his name. Privately, the Duke's attentions to his daughter's governess became increasingly difficult to disguise. People are beginning to talk, Lady Henrietta warned him during afternoon tea in the garden, while Florence supervised Sophia's sketching nearby. A duke cannot court a governess, William, regardless of her newly restored connections. I am well aware of society's limitations, Aunt, William replied, his eyes following Florence's graceful movements. Just as I am aware of its extraordinary capacity for adaptation when presented with a fait accompli. Lady Henrietta's teacup clattered against its saucer. William Xavier, you cannot mean to marry the girl. I assure you, Aunt, I can and do. His smile held certainty. Though I have yet to secure the lady's consent. She will be scorned, ostracized, by some, perhaps initially. But a Duchess of Westmoreland has considerable influence in determining who may be scorned. His tone brooked no argument. Besides, Sophia adores her. Indeed, the change in his daughter had been remarkable. Under Florence's gentle guidance, Sophia had blossomed from a defiant, unhappy child into a confident young lady whose intelligence was now channeled into curiosity rather than rebellion. Later that evening, William found Florence in the library, returning a volume of poetry to its shelf. You've transformed this household, he said quietly, startling her. Florence turned, a blush coloring her cheeks. I merely provided some consistency for Sophia. You provided far more than that. He moved closer, his expression earnest. You showed her that loss doesn't define us. That grace can emerge from even the darkest circumstances. Lessons I learned through necessity, she said softly. Lessons I needed as desperately as my daughter. William took her hand, his touch sending warmth through her veins. Florence, I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is improper, why society would object. William, let me finish, he insisted gently. 3 years ago, I retreated from life after Caroline's death, focusing solely on Sophia and my estates. I convinced myself that was enough. Then you arrived with your quiet determination and unwavering integrity, and suddenly I found myself awakening to possibilities I thought forever lost. Florence's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. The distance between us exists only if we allow it, he interrupted, drawing her closer. I am asking you, Florence Lockhart, to do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife. To continue guiding Sophia, but as her mother rather than her governess. To stand beside me, not behind me, for all our remaining days. Tears blurred Florence's vision as joy overcame caution. Society will talk. Let them. His smile was tender as he brushed away a tear from her cheek. They'll soon tire of the scandal when they discover how utterly ordinary our happiness is. Ordinary. She laughed softly. There is nothing ordinary about this, William. Perhaps not, he conceded, his forehead touching hers. But then, there is nothing ordinary about you, my love. Their wedding the following spring was small but elegant, with Sophia proudly serving as bridesmaid. Society gossips who had predicted disaster were confounded by the Duchess of Westmoreland's quiet dignity and the Duke's obvious adoration. The Jonathan Lockhart Foundation for Mathematical Excellence soon became one of the most prestigious academic institutions in England, sponsoring promising students regardless of background or connections. And if anyone remembered that the Duchess had once been merely a governess, they found it difficult to reconcile with the accomplished woman whose grace had transformed not only the Duke of Westmoreland, but the very notion of what love could overcome.